Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing is Power. I pray that you guys are doing well out there. I had a pleasure, an absolute pleasure, to interview Mr. Oscar Alston from the original Stone City Band, Rick James. Here is my one-on-one interview with Mr. Alston. So, Mr. Alston, I wanted to ask you, outside of, the music and the band, Rick James, Stone City Band, who are you as a person? Who is Oscar as a person?
Well, I would say, first of all, you don't have to call me Mr. Alston. You can call me Mr. Wonderful. And I think me as a person, that's kind of like an introspective question.
What does that word mean?
Introspective, like looking into myself, looking inward, telling you about me, who I think I am. And I could say, I think I'm the greatest guy or whatever. And somebody else said, well, I don't really know Oscar like that. I know him as, someone. But to me, I think I'm a regular person in this shell of a body that God has kind of directed here and there and allowed me to be and witness and partake in some wonderful, some things not so crazy good, but some wonderful aspects of life. Mm-hmm. And even at my stage now, I want to capture the moment and learn from, the lessons that I do get in life. And so I consider myself mainly like a regular person, real regular, that just happened to have gotten some good breaks in life from God's blessing me.
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to ask, because a lot of people see like the stage image, the musical image, but we all have that personal type of person we are. So that's why I wanted to ask that, like, who are you, outside of the music?
Regular, yeah, just really, and I know people probably as a cliche, I'm just a regular, average, everyday guy, but I really am. To me, I have no real talent, so to speak. I play bass, and I tell you what, Tia, when I do play, or really anything that I do, anything that I that I set out to do, I wind up being good at it. I wind up being blessed good, not just good. I mean, like anointed good. And I've grown to pretty much expect that out of things that I do, Sure, I may practice or I may work at something. I may learn how to use a particular tool or something to get, but I've always, in my average self, expected to be extraordinary. Yeah. I've always expected that.
Okay, cool, yeah. How was it growing up in Buffalo, New York? Like, where did it all begin? How was it in the very beginning?
Well, in Buffalo, I would say when I was say around 8, 9, maybe 7, 8 years old, it just seemed like we grew up in the projects. We were in one particular projects at one point, and then at around 7 or 8, we moved to the Jefferson projects, which is where I was when I started playing music in that. But I couldn't think of anywhere better to live than in the projects and in Buffalo, because I really didn't know anything else. I mean, we would go during the summer. We would go on a summer vacation down south, drive to North Carolina. And I didn't want to be around there because it was always hot, no air conditioning, no anything like that. The water was in the well. Every day we would go out in the field and what was it? Tobacco, a little bit of cotton. I didn't do much cotton. I wasn't that fast or good, so I was kind of in the way. But we pulled a little tobacco, and I always thought that it was my uncle's farm. I said, "Oh man, my uncle owned all this. Look over there. It's wide as can see." But he was just working the land, so I wasn't crazy about. I loved it, but I didn't. I was glad to get back home.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Cool. When did you meet Rick? And and everybody else that was in the band from Buffalo?
I met Rick. I had heard about him before I met him. He was like a folk hero in Buffalo first. He had. I didn't know anything about him when he was doing his thing in Canada and that, but he had. And he had written for Motown. He was like a writer for Motown. I didn't know anything about it then. But I used to play for a group called the Manhattans from New York City. I also played for Blue Magic, who's from Philadelphia.
I've heard of my mom. And, my mother had all that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but my mother listened. She had all that music.
Yeah. She knows the guy. And so one time, before I actually met Rick, there were some buddies of mine that lived in the projects with us. They played instruments as well. We all played, like bass player. We grew up together, and the other guy played drums. He lived in one building. I lived in the other building. We would play, and I'll tell you about how we started playing. But they actually played for Rick first. They played on Rick's first album, the Come Get It album. And since we were close, they used to practice at one point at the bass player, my buddy, house, or his girlfriend's house. And so one time we were outside, standing outside, listening to, first we were inside listening to the band. Oh man, they sound better than I ever heard them before in my whole entire life. And we grew up together playing. So Rick wasn't there at this time. He was just jamming. I said, oh man, it's grooving. And so Rick came. He came in the limousine. He still wasn't Rick James as we know him, but he was Rick James, around here in Buffalo. And so when he came into the house, before he came in, somebody said, hey, okay, it's a private rehearsal. Everybody got to leave. So, okay, no problem. Appreciate being here. So we were outside, and Rick walked in, I don't even know if he looked at me at all, but how you stare at a star. He hadn't had out any records at this time. I think he had this one song called Get Up and Dance. That was a hit here in Buffalo. And so he walked past, and I got to smell his cologne. I got to see him, real close. And so he went inside, and that's when I really heard the band. I said, man, these guys sound like I've never heard them, before. They sound so good. And in my mind, remember I told you about me being extraordinary. In my mind, it hit me that I don't know what's going to happen with Richard Shaw, who was the bass player at the time. I only would hope for good and better things for him. But I said, I'm going to wind up playing for him, Rick James. I'm gonna play bass for him. It was kind of strange because Rick had a bass player. Rick had a band. He already liked them, and they were, doing his album. So that was my first time encountering him. And something happened with the money, with that particular group of guys. It was Billy Nunn on organ, his brother Bobby Nunn, who sang real good on piano or synthesizer. Bobby Nunn's wife was a background singer. Richard Shaw and his brother Lorenzo Shaw. Richard played bass. Lorenzo played drums. And that made up pretty much the guys that did Rick's first album, Come Get It, which had You and I and that on it. And so somehow, some way, Rick was always known up to that point as somebody that didn't pay. He wouldn't pay you. Part of the reason was he wasn't getting the money, from Motown. The other part was he was, when he did get the money, he just owed so many people that, it was just, it'd go real fast. Plus he was living a high life, limousines, and so the money wouldn't last very long. And so it turned out that this is what I heard, that from one of the guys in the band, that Rick gave the band leader a check. And in those days, out-of-state check the bank would hold it for like up to 2 weeks before they would cash it. Now it's like 2-3 days,
Right.
Or the next day.
Yeah, just depends on the bank.
It was like 2 days. Yeah, 10 days, which amounted to 2 weeks. So while the guy was waiting for the check to clear, he did something, and it turned out that when the check cleared, the money either, something happened funny with the money. But it was an accident. It wasn't a real, So the band was like, man, F Rick, man, we ain't going, we ain't doing it. But, I guess the guy tried to let him know, hey, man, no, it was a clerical error. Why the check didn't clear right away. And in the meantime, I needed to pay my rent or whatever. And so I did this, did that. Next thing you know, something may have backfired or something like that. And it didn't. Anyway, it turned out that the band didn't get paid when they thought they should have. So they wound up quitting.
Wow. And
that's when we came on board. Myself, Lannis, Levi was already there. So they had the band, and they had a few different bass players, come on board that didn't gel with Rick. I mean, but these were like awesome bass players here in Buffalo. For some reason or another, chemistry didn't work with them, and so Levi told Rick, "Say, hey man, get this dude, man, Oscar. He's the band leader for the Manhattans. We saw him on in concert." One of those, you probably weren't even born then, when they had a couple of different programs. In Concert was one, where it was a live program and people would perform, almost like Soul Train,
Okay,
like
yeah,
that.
that's before my time.
Yeah, and so there was this one song that we did. I don't know if it was Kiss and Say Goodbye, but it might have been, because we did not go to Hollywood, before that. But anyway, we would perform, and at the end of the song, for some reason or another, we would always not end it properly, not end it, boom, that's the end, like that. We would end it some kind of crazy way. Cats would still be holding the chords. I didn't want to do that on TV. So I just turned to the band. I'm not the leader of the band. I was just the bass player, piano player was the leader. So I just turned to the band and just took my bass, and went boom, so that we could end all at once, and did that. so them back here in Buffalo, Oscar's the leader. He must be the band leader. Look how he did.
Yeah.
And so Rick called me in, and I never said anything about me seeing him, at rehearsal and us getting kicked out of the house there at that point. But I played, and I liked, what we were doing, and he liked what I was doing, and it just kind of gelled from there. And he said, at that point, we were not playing. We were practicing for Tina Marie's first album. And he said, if y'all do well, meaning that if y'all don't quit on me, if y'all, do good, and I turn this album into Motown and it's Tina Marie's, nice thing. If y'all do good, I'm going to make y'all the Stone City Band, because his album was already out had been out for months called Rick James and the Stone City Band, Come Get It.
Mm-hmm.
But he really didn't have a band. So that's kind of like a, little thing where we say we're the original Stone City Band, because the other guys were just sort of like studio musicians. They hadn't gotten to that level of being the Stone City Band, but Rick James knew he needed to have that as the name and the aura of Rick James and the Stone City Band, almost like a band thing more than just Rick James.
Gotcha. What was it like when you guys started to record, Bustin' Out of L7, Firing It Up, all those different albums, even you guys' solo albums? How was that? Do you have any like really good memories about that?
Yeah, it grew. We were all taking it in. It was all of our first time doing a lot of this on that scale. Up to that point, we would record at home with the little cassette tapes and, do a little something here and there, but never anything that would be on radio, or never anything that somebody else paid for us to do it. It was never like that. So we kind of just took it in, and we were in awe as much as the people were in awe of seeing us do this. In the studio that we would go in, now all of a sudden, instead of us, recording on a, 2-track or 4-track cassette tape player, now we're recording in a, $100,000, at that time it was, a lot of money, studio that had everything, a control room. You see the board, as big as your bed, So we kind of we didn't go in it with our mouth open, in awe, but we were in awe of everything, and just seeing the professionalism, seeing the people that were around that were professionals. I mean, you see, white guys in the wintertime with suntans. Wait a minute, and they're, coming from Florida, and out in California or Hawaii or whatever, and they come hang out, and so we pretty much acted like we've been there before, but we were totally enjoying it. And I tell you, I think the hand of God, or I know the hand of God was on us all, because there were several times that we could have been in bad shape, either accidentally or taking some kind of a drug that was experimental, and that, but God protected us, and I grew up in church, so he always kind of let me see, or I always would see something and say, wow, man, that could have been it. One time, this was later on, I was driving from Sanford. We were recording in Marin County, which is right on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. In Sausalito is the name of the city. And so, going over that bridge, I mean, you 80 miles an hour is nothing, to drive. If you drive 55 miles an hour, you probably get run over, on this thing. So I was in this big, not a limousine, but in this big sedan, coming from San Francisco. I don't know what I went there for. And I was by myself, and I was coming like downhill on this thing, and looked like a car had stopped. There may be 3, lanes or so, but for whatever reason, it looked like this car in front of me had completely stopped. And I hit the brakes, and I can feel the car sort of, fishtail a little bit. Yeah. And for a brief moment, I said, I'm out of control with this car. I have nothing I can do. And if it doesn't stop on its own, I'm going to hit the back of this car at about 75 miles an hour. Because I don't know what I was doing, distracted or whatever. When I saw it, it was too late to really And for some reason, the car just veered around that stopped car. And I'm like, wow, I didn't do that. I didn't make this car go around.
That was nothing but
car,
God.
but it went up. Yeah, and that was, and so things like that would happen. And I would say, wow, man, God is protecting me, you know. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that was nothing but the hand of God. You know, He made that car go around the other car.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So He's a good driver, the Lord.
Yeah, that's a good testimony. Wow. Yeah. I understand that you became a born again while you were in the band, and is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about that and like how you brought it to the band or to Rick and his response and just how that kind of went?
Well, I tell you what, after I had left the band and everything, Rick gave his heart to the Lord too.
Yeah.
And
I
so
read that.
He did. He did some gospel music, but I think he was disenchanted with the whole thing. I believe he kind of joined this white church that was in Orchard Park, which is like a suburb of Buffalo, and a lot of well-to-do people. Mostly all white. And their music was pretty different. It was almost like country and western and oh, holy thou, whereas we in church.
Yeah.
And so I think Rick got a little bit not discouraged, but disenchanted with it, and went back to secular music. But I was with Rick from 78 till maybe 80 to 83. And almost the whole time, I'm looking to make it rich, and I'm saying, okay, I've almost struck gold. I got my pickaxe behind my head, and I'm ready to, hit this wall, and gold is going to come out. And the reason why that was so important to me was, like I said, I grew up in church, and in church, to me, everybody was poor. Everybody. The preacher, he had a Cadillac, but it wasn't quite necessarily the model year Cadillac. It was it was a Cadillac, but it might have been 3 or 4 years old or 5 years old, something like that. So I didn't want, and it seemed like everybody pretty much was always at the verge of struggling. You would hear people testify how good the Lord is because He allowed them to get back on welfare because the welfare people had kicked them off. And they went down there, they appealed, and they got back on welfare. Praise God. I'm like, well, hold up, wait a minute.
That's not...
This is the guy that owns the cattle on 1,000 Hill. He don't need all the cattle, why, why is it so hard? So that's where I grew up, in Church of God in Christ. And so I said, if I, after a while of working with Rick, I can quit, be rich. I don't have to worry about money. I can do whatever I wanted to do, be saved, and be, move on with my life kind of thing, which is what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to be poor, but I wanted to be, I knew I had to be saved. So after about 5 years of working with Rick, we had already done Street Songs album. We had already done Throwing Down. I think that was my last album for him. And so while we were doing the Mary Jane Girls' first album, normally it's the whole band. I mean, we would have such a ball, T. I tell you, I couldn't have hoped for anything better because everybody in the band, mainly the main, core of the band, we're from Buffalo. So when we went on the road, we got on the bus, 2 big, Provost buses that were, be at Rick's house or wherever. And we would go on the road, it'd be a party at the house, and we'd go, to our first gig or recording. We would go to the airport and we all would just have fun, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and calling up to the you know, when you at that point they probably don't do it now. They say, yeah, listen, can you page Mr. Me off for me? Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, his name is Jack. Jack Me. Hey, okay, paging Mr. Jack Me off. Can you please? You know, he's like, oh man, we would have a ball just saying that,
Yeah.
and you know, the people would know something is up afterwards. But it turned out going to San Francisco again to really to Sausalito,
Mm-hmm.
going there, record the Mary Jane Girls' first album. All of the band had pretty much quit by now, and it was just me, Levi, and Rick in the airport. We
Mm-hmm.
only had practiced 4 songs, but I knew we needed more than that. And I would come to Rick, you know, I got some songs, and man, I got all the songs I need,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Then as it turned out, when he would hear me playing piano or bass, he was like, hey, what's that? You know, oh, it's just a little jam. And we were signed under contract that anything that we did was automatically Rick's. And if Rick didn't want it, we were under contract with Motown. It was automatically Motown. They would have to give us in writing, I don't want that song. Rick would have to do it, and Motown would have to do it. We don't want that song. So then it could be ours. We could do whatever. But they would never turn it down. They would keep. So it turned out, I said, listen, I'm not gonna get rich from, I can see it, you know, just us 3 going, you know, it didn't feel good like it used to feel. We used to have fun. I didn't enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And he had said some things, all like for the last couple years of me playing for him, it would, I would say, Rick, I need some money. I want to buy a house, not just a regular old house, you know, on the block. I want to buy a house. I didn't tell him what kind of house. I just said, I want to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need a house. You got my house, which was true. I mean, you know, he let me, you know, I could, you know, claim one of the rooms in there. And that
So
was
you
my
guys
house.
stayed with him?
Huh?
You guys stayed with him in his house?
No, none of us really stayed with him, but we kind of, you know, we would crash out there 2 days at a time, a couple of days at a time, but then we would wind up going home, you know. But Rick would want to stay all the time because if you're there at 2 a.m, hey man, come on, let's go downstairs, you know, and jam. And all of a sudden we were writing 4 or 5 songs, you know, which is what he would want. But it turned out that I never got the car that I wanted from him, never got the house that I wanted, you know, working with him. And I said, you know what, I'm going to wind up dying in sin, because at that point I thought that playing secular music was sin and I would go to hell, you know. Because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to die in sin and go to hell. So while we were out there, we recorded 4 songs of the Mary Jane Girls. And one of the songs he took, Musical Love, was my song, words and music. He put it on the album, I think to spite me. Because when I told him that, man, one night, I was listening to, like, just so happened to be on TV. I think it was 700 Club, one of the black guy, King Kid, that was on there. And he was just talking like he normally would do. Mm-hmm. And it just pricked my heart for some reason. Oh, man, I started crying. I started thinking about, you know, where am I headed? You know, I'm not happy. This is not, you know, this is not where God would want me. It's not, you know. So in the middle of that, I gave my heart to the Lord. I didn't think about the contract. I didn't think